Shannon. As she mentioned, my name is Josh Coons, so I'm a grant manager as well with the Department of Commerce in the Office of Employment and Training. I mainly deal with our Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act funding that we receive. But I'm going to be going over the budget with you all as well as a PowerPoint presentation on Grants 101 for those of you that may not or may be new to the grants game. But the first thing I'm going to do is share my screen and show you a resource for you all. Okay, so the Department of Commerce has our accountability team puts out this site that they're kind of are making more interactive. So I'll send the link here in the chat momentarily. I'll have to stop sharing, I think. Actually, here we go. Let's see if that works. If not, if that doesn't work, I'll send another one once I'm done presenting. But so this here has these four spill outs that go through, and the first one here is apply for funding. So here you can see all of our open notice of funding opportunities, and then here's the clean energy career pathway. Once you click on that, it's going to take you to the information related to the NOFO and then any of the attachments that you all will need. So I'm going to cover these bottom four here. I believe Shannon covered the first two. So the first one that you'll see is the uniform grant application. So if you click on that, it's going to take you to this PDF. We filled out the agency completed section that's listed here. So your responsibility would be the applicant completed section. So you'll fill out information related to your organization. So it asks for the contact for your business administrative matters, your program and project matters, and then the amount of funding you're coming in for. So you'll want to make sure that this application meets the amount that your uniform budget is coming in for as well. So those amounts should equal. Then it'll have you complete your mandatory disclosure and your conflict of interest disclosure. So that's as simple as reading through this, making sure none of them are applicable, checking, no, there are no violations, and then signing it by an authorized representative. And that's the same thing for the conflict of interest form. So those will all need to be in your submission for this grant. And then the last thing that I didn't go over is the uniform budget template. I'm going to run through some slides first. This just talks about the actual process of getting pre-qualified and things along those lines, and then we'll dive into the budget template. I know some of you on this call are, this is the initial session for you all, so you're just kind of trying to understand what the NOFO is about. So you might not have your fiscal staff on here, but good news is that this is recorded, so they can come look at this as well as all join in those office hours. So if your fiscal staff have any issues filling out the uniform budget. All right, so we're going to run through some slides here. I'm not going to go in PowerPoint mode, but so this is the Workforce our Grants 101. This presentation is going to be strictly related to the pre-award process of the grants. So obviously, once you all are notified that you're awarded, then you'll be in the award phase and then post-award at the end of the grant. So we're governed by the Grant Accountability and Transparency Act. That's for all state our departments. It's supposed to be a standardized way for us to increase accountability and transparency on grant funds, reduce administrative burden on agencies and grantees, and it adopted the 2 CFR 200. So some pre-award requirements that must be completed prior to the grant award execution. So that's once you all are awarded, you'll want to make sure that your data pre-qualified, and we'll talk about the different steps that you may need to do so for that. You'll also make sure that once you're in that portal that you've selected an indirect cost rate. We use the centralized indirect cost rate system. If you already have a grant, then you may have already elected that for this year. But we'll ask that you go in there and select an indirect cost rate, and we'll talk about the different options that you have available if you're newer to choosing an indirect cost rate. So all grantees must be registered with the state of Illinois using an illinois.gov authentication portal. A person or a business email address is required to establish. Registration is completed by browsing, and then there's the link, and we'll provide these slides to you all as well. And then associating your illinois.gov account with your organization. Completing that process triggers the pre-qualification verification. Pre-qualification means that you have a valid DUNS number, you have a current sam.gov account, you're in good standing with the Secretary of State, and you're not on any of the listed stop pays or excluded parties lists that are there. And just keep in mind that pre-qualification is dynamic, and it verifies verifications are completed overnight. So you may be pre-qualified one day, your sam.gov account expires, and the next day you're no longer able to receive payments from your grant money. So it's important that you maintain good standing in all those aspects throughout the life of the grant. If there are no issues, then the GATA portal will send an email communicating that you're pre-qualified or you're qualified. That's great. That means that you're able to do business with us. Like I said, some of the issues that we see where they're not pre-qualified or the DUNS number isn't current, SAM cage code isn't current, and they're not in good standing with the Secretary of State. All right, so part of the application process, or excuse me, part of the awarding process is we kind of assess your risk, and then it's required that we put that information in your grant agreement, and that's for each individual organization that we award funds to. So the way we do that is we have you guys complete two risk assessments. There's a fiscal risk assessment. It's called the internal control questionnaire. It is automated, and it's actually through that portal that I was showing you before. So once you get registered, you'll complete that on a yearly basis. And I believe it's a rolling thing. So if you already have if you already have a grant with DECIO, or really, I think it actually might apply to all grants with the state, then if you've already completed this year, you wouldn't have to do it specifically for this grant. However, the programmatic risk assessment is specific to this grant opportunity. I don't believe it's been given to you all yet. That'll be completed once you are awarded the grant funds, and we'll send you a separate document. You'll complete it, we'll score it, and then if we have any issues or any things that we'd like to add to your grant agreement, then we'll do so. But your risk profiles are determined based off of those two risk assessments that you complete. All right, so talking about indirect cost rate selection, all grantees must select an indirect rate cost option in the centralized indirect rate system. That's even if you're waiving any indirect costs, we still will ask that you complete that in the portal. If you're looking to negotiate an indirect cost rate because you haven't done so with any previous grants that you've had, or you're expired on the rate that you have approved, then you'll go into negotiations and you'll elect that through the portal, and then you'll receive an email from Crow, who's our third-party vendor that negotiates your indirect cost rate with you. The options that you do have available is you have a current federal negotiated rate. So I believe if you can receive a federal rate if you receive a certain amount of grant funds. I want to say it was roughly at 35 million the last I checked. So if you receive more than that, then you probably already have a rate, and you are able to bring that to the grant that you'll have with us. If you don't have a current federal rate, nor do you have a state rate, then you can go into negotiations. And like I said, we use Crow for that. The other option is just probably the most common is elect to use the federal 10% de minimis rate. A lot of our grantees are smaller organizations, so maybe with this NOFO, you guys may all have state rates, and it might not be an issue, but we'll go over how you calculate that 10% de minimis, and then or here in a little shortly with the budget. And then the last option that we see often is elect to decline any indirect cost rates. So some individuals or some organizations that we work with choose not to collect or select any of them at all. All right. So who's required to use the centralized indirect cost rate system? Any organization that receives a grant from the state of Illinois. And if a grantee organization has a federally negotiated rate, they're allowed to bring that down to this grant. If the grantee organization chooses to elect 10% de minimis, they're required to make an election in the indirect cost rate system. And a grantee may volunteer to accept a lower indirect cost rate, but state agencies are not allowed to force or coerce a grantee to take a lower rate. All right, so uniform application for state grant assistance, that's that form that we went over already, but it just tells you that you're responsible for the agency information, and then the applicant, you're responsible for the applicant completed section, and then the certification portion. The agency information is already filled out for you all. The uniform budget template, so we use, all state agencies use the same template. Some of us have made small changes to it, but most of it, the material aspect of it is all the same, but it's modeled after the standard form 524. And we ask that when you're inputting costs or budget, items into your budget, that you try to follow the three requirements that 2 CFR 200 labels. So it's allowable, reasonable, and allocable. And we'll go into those now. I feel like a lot of the times with some of our grants, like the biggest issue or something that a grantee may come to us later on when they've already been awarded is, hey, how can I pay for this with grant funds? And really it's such a, it's not, sometimes it can be a gray area, because 2 CFR 200 kind of leaves it up to be that. So it basically says that any cost that you're trying to have, trying to use grant funds for, it needs to follow these three rules. And if you can explain it under, these three rules, then it's an allowable, cost with grant funds. So as long as you can tie it back to, your program specifically, then most likely, when we can see the benefit from it, then most likely you're going to be able to, use grant funds for that. So it has to be an allowable cost. It's necessary and reasonable for the performance of the award, and be allocable under the award cost principles. Some of our awards, even though they are not federally funded, we still adopt 2 CFR 200. So if you notice it, I can't remember if CJ, I think it's its own, it's not federally funded. So if you see the word federal award, we still follow those principles. It has to be a reasonable cost. So whether a cost is of a type generally recognized as ordinary and necessary for the operation of the non-federal entity or the proper and efficient performance of the federal award. And if you're interested, to try to, run through these three steps with something you're trying to purchase, then we have them listed here. So like 2 CFR 200 404 talks about reasonable costs, and allowables 403. And then the third section is allocable, which is 405. So a cost is allocable to a federal award or cost objective if the goods or services involved are chargeable and assignable to that award or cost objective in accordance with relative benefits received. So again, it just has to, as long as it's supporting the program, then you're in good shape. All right, there's two types of costs that you will see in the budget, or that you'll apply to this grant. There's your program funds and your administrative funds, and then there's direct and indirect costs in both of those. So direct costs are costs that can be identified specifically with a particular final cost objective, such as an award or other internally or externally funded activity, or that can be directly assigned to such activities. So most of the costs that you'll see in the budget will be direct costs. And then there's those other situations, so indirect costs, which are for facilities and administration. Those are costs that are incurred for a common or joint purpose, benefiting more than one cost objective and not readily assignable to a specific program or cost objective. So that could be salaries for some of your administrative folks. That's typically what we see the most for indirect costs. All right. So I'm going to switch over to the uniform budget template now. These next few slides just talk about it, and so I'll actually put it into, so you guys can visualize it here. So the first section of the budget template is the general instructions. These instructions just talk about the different parts of it. So selecting an indirect cost rate and how you complete the form. They're pretty generic. But we do try to check these to make sure they're accurate for each NOFO that we put out. This next is the section A. Anything in light blue is something you'll be responsible for. So your organization name, CSFA number, which you can find from the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Your UEI, which is your unique entity identifier. I think that's kind of interchangeable with your DUNS number. I think we would accept either in this box. The no phone number that you're applying for, which is posted online as well, and then you won't know your grant number, so that part can be left blank. We wouldn't assign that until you've been awarded. So here are all the budget lines that are going to be available to you all, the budget expenditure categories. So we'll go over each one of these, but you'll see that each one of these categories has a specific tab. So the personnel tab has its own, or personnel section has its own tab here where you'd enter information. And if you go down the line, you'll see each one of these to the right here. So nothing is going to be filled in here for your total expenditures. You're going to complete that by actually going to the tab, typing the position in there, and then once you fill it out, it's going to actually copy that information over to this tab. So really at the end, all you're doing after you've entered in all your budget information, you're just coming here to make sure that everything is looking accurate. And then once you have that'll be your final total of the amount of funds that you're requesting. So just going back to this tab real quick. So at the top there, it kind of lists from 2 CFR 200 what the definition of personnel is. And then we have here a name, position, salary or wage basis, percent of time, and length of time. We ask that if you have that individual's name, then you give us that information, or someone that you have on staff. If we see a lot of TBD or to be hired, that can raise flags. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. We understand that some people have to build capacity for this grant opportunity, but if you know that individual, put their name or initials of some sort, so we know that that's a position that's already filled versus a position that you guys plan to hire. You can put their position in here, their salary, and then you can use year, month, or hour. If they're an hourly employee, that's fine. You can enter that information in here. The percent of time that they're going to be dedicated to this program, and then the length of time. So, for some of you all, if this is a 2-year grant, or if you're using all 2 years for instead of the planning year, then you would have a 2 there. So you're budgeting twice the amount. The only other thing is on each of these budget tabs, there's a personnel narrative. It's important that any section that you have budget dedicated to, there's a narrative. So that can be that, Jill, the case manager, will be working with, just giving us a description of the duties that person's going to fill that is related to this program. And the next section here is your fringe benefits. So these are all kind of laid out the same. They give a description from 2 CFR 200. We want the name, the position, and then like the base salary that we're applying your fringe rate to. So usually in this narrative, we ask for that fringe rate. So if you come up with 14.5%, then we want to know how you came up with that. So what's that covering? Like workers' comp insurance, Social Security, anything like that. How you determine that rate, we would like to see down there. Travel. So this one, we don't really harp on very much. So at the end of the day, if you guys want to see that, if you want to budget $1,000 for travel, then do what you need to do to get to that. So we understand that over the next 2 years, you don't know why you're going to need to travel. So you can put the purpose of travel TBD or site monitoring or whatever that may be. Same thing with location. The rate that you reimburse for. So I can't remember what the federal rate is right now, but we'll use 0.57. We'll say, we don't have to put a basis, I don't think. We'll say for 500 miles, and we'll say 1 trip. So you'll see that like you kind of have to play with these to get them to go where you want them to, or the amount that you want. So if you're trying to get to $1,000, then if you just put a quantity of 2,000 here to budget $1,000 for travel, then that's fine too. We're not gonna be like, well, what's that travel for? Like as long as it's related to the program, then we're not gonna need you to have exact travel itineraries set up for us. All right, so equipment. So just keep in mind the big thing here is that with 2 CFR 200, equipment and supplies, a lot of people confuse those two. So equipment is defined as anything with an acquisition cost of $5,000 or more. So you would think a computer, would go under equipment, but if it doesn't cost more than $5,000, then technically on this form, it's a supply. So just keep in mind for that. We don't see a lot of equipment purchased, and it's totally acceptable if you do have some equipment. Just give us a good narrative down here of how that's going to benefit your program to make sure that it's approved. Like I said, supplies, obviously anything you can think of related to the program is mainly going to go here for supplies. So if you have questions about that, just let us know. Contractual services and subawards. So if you have subawards that you're passing the funding through to another organization, that's kind of where this would go here. Anything contractual that you have, you'd list on this tab. Consultant services and expenses. So if you guys, excuse me, have any like specific skill that you bring an outside organization to complete for you, any kind of consultant really, then this is the tab that you'd complete that for. Occupancy, so this is related to your rent and utilities. Just, this one's pretty self-explanatory. You just enter the information and then explain, what those costs are related to. R&D, we don't see a lot of research and development items budget, and so I won't go over it, but if you have questions, just reach out to us. Let me see if there's, okay, so this is one that I'll talk about here is your direct training and your work-based training. So the way we have it done, or we've completed, is there's this large section that's like your direct training costs, but we've entered these sublines here. So your occupational skills training, upgrade training, entrepreneurial training, job readiness, adult ed and literacy, and supportive services. So this is the section that you'll actually complete versus, just the reason that I bring this up is because the way our system for reporting works is we have grantees attempt to try to report costs directly onto this direct training line, but we've created these sublines for you all to report costs. That way you can transfer them from occupational skills training to support services easy without doing a whole budget modification, which you'll understand to be, save a lot of time that way. So that's why I made a point to bring that up. Same thing with your work-based training. So work-based training is the generic term that we use, but there's different descriptions that we have here. So apprenticeship, pre-apprenticeship, work experience, internship, transitional jobs, OJT, customized training, and then incumbent worker training. One thing I'll point out is, so we have two tabs here: miscellaneous other costs and other program costs. So obviously with other program costs, those are costs that you didn't necessarily see fitting under your work-based training or direct training. So anything, any program costs that you didn't think could be classified elsewhere, you'd input on the other program. The good thing is with the application, like we said, we're not going to dock you all for misclassifying items in your budget. Once they review it, as long as it makes sense and it flows with your program implementation plan and your narrative, then you'll receive the points for this section. Once you're awarded and we notice that you misclassified something, that's when we'll come back to you all and let you know, hey, this could actually be considered this cost. So just do your best on the actual application and submission and classifying items, and then we can work with you all once you're awarded to fix any issues. Another section here is your barrier reduction fund. I don't recall if you guys will be using barrier reduction a lot with this program. It's still available to you all, and so I think Shannon, are you still with us? Will they be using barrier reduction a lot?
They could. So this is
They do
good
have the
to go.
possibility.
Yeah,
Okay.
it is. Yep.
Okay, great. So yeah, this is just where you'll input your barrier reduction funds, and then you'll explain in the narrative, what those funds will be used for. So to pay for court fees, whatever it may be. And your last section is your indirect costs. So I purposely skipped a few tabs at the beginning, and we'll go back to those now. So this ICI tab is again, you're going to select your indirect cost rate information. So whatever you have in the portal that we talked about should be here. So if you guys are choosing the 10% of modified total direct costs, then you'll select that here. The good thing is that we have this indirect worksheet that we have made available to you all that kind of helps organizations complete or determine their direct cost base. And a lot of times, like I said, our grantees use the 10% MTDC, but then they don't know which, costs they're able to use, they have to exclude from their direct cost base. So we have this notes column here, and it says specifically for the de minimis, or MTDC as we call it, which sections can be included. So if you guys had 75,000 in personnel costs, and it says included in indirect cost base, that means that at the bottom here, it can be applied to your indirect rate. So you don't have to exclude it. But if I hit exclude here, you'll see it takes it away, and it says, okay, that 75 grand can't be applied to your indirect rate. Let's see. So for example, your supportive services or barrier reduction, we'll go with that. So if you have budgeted 120 grand for barrier reduction, we're saying that with the de minimis rate, none of that can be considered, in your indirect cost calculation. So all of that would have to be excluded. So you'd go through these notes here if you're using 10% de minimis to determine which categories are excluded and which ones are included. If you're using a federal rate or a state rate that's only applicable to your personnel or fringe, then you would pretty much exclude everything. So any line that's not personnel or fringe, you would pull over here. And then so that'll give you a base of just the 100 grand that's applied to your indirect cost rate. So what I mean by applying to your indirect cost rate is, so once you complete this worksheet, you'll determine, okay, like out of the 220,000 that we're requesting, 100 of it can be applied to our indirect cost rate. So you'd go back to your indirect cost tab and put that base here. So $100,000, and you put an indirect cost rate or selection. Your base is $100,000, and you're saying that your rate is 10%. So that will calculate how much indirect costs you're allowed to take on this grant. So if you go back to the Section 8 tab, you'll see that that's entered in there. A lot of grantees, like I said, will use a federal rate. So sometimes it's like a wonky number, like 24.2%. So of 100 grand, you'd be able to use $24,200 in indirect costs that you'd be able to apply for this grant. So really, the worksheet is required if you are taking indirect costs. If you're not taking any at all, then you can leave this section blank. But it's just there to help grantees figure out their base to apply to their indirect rate that they're bringing into this grant. The last thing here is your certification page. So on this, we just ask that one or two individuals, it doesn't matter, how many, it can be one, it doesn't have to be both, but it has to be a CFO or a director of some sort, signs off on this form. So we ask that you just PDF this form and then submit it with your actual uniform budget template. Let me see. And this just gives a breakdown of the funds that you have budgeted. So in this example, we just put in funds for personnel and travel in the actual budget specific tabs. So we're coming in for $62,840. The only thing I didn't go over is matching funds or non-state funds that are listed here. So, and I'll briefly touch this just so it doesn't confuse you all when you're filling this out, but some programs require grantees come in with any non-state funds that they're using as leverage to this program. So each tab has a non-state total. If you'd like to fill that out, if you have other funds that that are going to help facilitate this program, then you're more than welcome to show that to us. But it's not a requirement. So anything that says non-state or like Section B, this auto populates all your non-state funds into this category. So I won't go over that anymore, just in case, I don't want to confuse anyone, but I'm sure you're already confused with this form. So, but if you have questions, just let me know. We are available, and I'll be in on those office hours, so your fiscal folks can ask questions as well. So I'm going to stop sharing here.